Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I am so pleased you joined me for today's show. This is My Life as a Landlord, and today we're exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for Illinois. In all of my location-specific episodes, I've included lots of resources via hyperlinks in this case, for Illinois and the Illinois Tenancy Act and a bunch of other stuff. And in each of my location-specific podcasts, they're set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. First, what are the basics of that area? In this case, it's Illinois. Second, what are the nuances of this location? Third, what is about some guidance about abandoned items, personal property items that a tenant might leave behind? And then four, where to get help in the local area of Illinois or Chicago. We've got a couple of different varieties of resources here. And then at the very end of this episode, I'll go through what I call my bingo card, which is my list of the most standard items I see when I do these location-specific episodes. I'll review what's there, what's missing, and what's extra. Now, I will tell you that there might be more resources than what I'm showing you. This is just to get you started. You've got to do your own research and get everything set up for your rentals wherever they are in Illinois. Now, just know this is not all inclusive. And even if I got it 100% perfect, 5 minutes after I'm done recording this, the laws could change. So you've got to keep doing research and keep up with the current laws in Illinois or wherever your rentals may be. I'm going to give a shout out for today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments LLC. If you want to know more about real estate investing or making money potentially from real estate investing, check out alohajv.com. You can see what Michael and I are up to. Now, if you were not listening to the previous episode on Kentucky, if you want to laugh, listen to that episode because I just recorded it just before I started this one. And it's a little traumatizing. Kentucky was a little traumatizing. It was a lot of negotiation and not a lot of substance. I can tell you, Illinois is set up compared to Kentucky, set up. So this is good. I'm going to start screen sharing now. Oh my gosh, I don't know what happened with Kentucky. Really crazy. Okay, I'm going to screen share. So if you're watching at My Life as a Landlord on YouTube, that is the ideal way to watch these episodes because you're going to watch exactly what I'm doing on screen. So I've got 8 hyperlinks so far in the show notes. Now there's some that I don't normally add from different law firms. I did that because I felt like I didn't have enough substance from Kentucky. So I'm doing this one a little differently because I want to make sure I'm giving you all kinds of different resources. There just wasn't a whole lot for Kentucky. I was just kind of shocked. Anyway, so 8 so far. If we figure something else out and I really want to add it for you, then I will add as we go through and record this episode. But we're starting here. So this is the Illinois Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, landlord and tenant rights and laws. Now, so this is just a quick little brochure. It's just a 3-pager that basically is going to give you the summary of landlord and tenant rights and laws in Illinois. So there's a little bit in here, and it also will tell you this is a fact sheet, but it's not the final source of information on landlord and tenant law. Consult your local municipality for ordinances. And it does not pertain if you are a tenant in federally subsidized housing. Okay, fair enough. So tenants' rights and responsibilities. So let's just do that. You should demand a written lease to avoid future misunderstandings with your landlord. If you are a fan of the show, I always say if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So there you go. That's a tenant right. You must pay your rent on time as a tenant. You've got to keep your unit clean and undamaged. You are responsible as a tenant for any damages beyond normal wear and tear. Tenants must also pay utility bill if the lease makes you responsible. You may not alter the rental unit without your landlord's approval. And there's 2 more. You must give written notice when you intend to move out. If you don't want to lose your security deposit, normally a 30-day notice is sufficient unless your lease requires longer. And the Illinois Retaliatory Eviction Act prohibits your landlord from evicting you for complaining to any governmental authority, including a housing inspector, human rights commission, etc. And I do know that this is a thing, which is interesting because this is specifically on my bingo card. Is this defined in this location? And the answer is yes, you can see it. I mean, we're only a couple minutes in and you can see this is in here, but so that's the tenant right and responsibilities. Let's go do the landlord one. And the landlord must keep the unit fit to live in. So it's got to be, there's a state of habitability there. The landlord must make all necessary repairs, and you must keep the rental unit in compliance with state and local health and housing codes. Landlords may set the amount of rent and the security deposit. That's interesting. Sets rent and security deposit. And you may charge a reasonable fee for late payments. And I bet reasonable is up for discussion, but that's okay. You can charge a reasonable fee for late rent payments, and you make reasonable rules and regulations. Pretty simple. Okay, security deposit. Your landlord can require you to pay a security deposit that may be used to cover unpaid rent, repairs, damages to the unit, and clean the unit after you move. The amount of security deposit is normally equal to 1 month's rent. However, there is no legal limit on the amount your landlord can require. Okay. So that's negotiable. And interest on your security deposit. State law requires that your landlord pay you interest on your security deposit if it is held for at least 6 months and there are at least 25 units in your building or complex. So basically, you have to be a bigger landlord. If you're a mom and pop, you would not have to do this. Your landlord must pay you the interest and apply its interest as a credit to your rent every 12 months. You may sue your landlord as a tenant. You may sue your landlord for willfully failing to pay interest and recover the amount equal to your security deposit, court costs, and security attorney fees. Okay, returning security deposit. Illinois Security Deposit Return Act requires your landlord to return your security deposit in full within 45 days of the date you moved. If your building or complex consists of 5 or more units, again, not a mom and pop, you are current on all your rent, you do not owe any back rent, you have not damaged the rental unit, and you've cleaned the apartment before you moved. If your landlord refuses to return all or a portion of your security deposit, she must give you an itemized list of damages along with paid receipts, within 30 days of the date you moved. You can sue your landlord to recover your security deposit, and if court finds that the landlord violated the security deposit law, she could be liable for damages in the amount equal to 2 times your security deposit, court costs, and attorney's fees. Rent increases. This is actually great because it's going through this, and I can tell you, poor Kentucky does not have this. Rent increases. In a week-to-week or month-to-month tenancy, the landlord can raise the rent by any amount she gives you 7 days notice for week-to-week or 30 days notice for month-to-month. The landlord cannot raise your rent if you have a fixed term lease. So like in a one-year lease, you can't do it. In other words, if you have a year lease, your landlord cannot raise your rent prior to the expiration of the lease. Illinois does not have rent control law. Therefore, your landlord can raise your rent as much as she deems necessary. However, you should contact your local units of government to see if your city or county has a rent control ordinance, because some of them do. Okay, let's see. It does not say how often you can increase the rent because it just says you just have to give proper notice, but you can give proper notice every few months if you wanted to, it looks like. Okay, terminating your lease. Your landlord must notify you in writing that she intends to terminate the lease. If you're renting a month-to-month, if you're renting on a month-to-month tenancy, you are entitled to a 30-day written notice. Leases running year to year require 60-day written notice, and your landlord does not have to give you any reason for terminating the lease. The landlord does not have to give any reason for terminating the lease. Does not. Okay, have to give notice for terminating the lease. Okay. So it is, so leases do end abruptly. They do not automatically convert there. And so you can be in a holdover situation. Okay, Illinois Rental Property Utility Service Act. If your landlord has failed to pay a utility bill for which he or she is legally responsible, you may pay the bill and deduct the payment from your rent. Huh, okay. That's good. Discrimination. I'm not even going to say that one because that is a complete showstopper. You cannot do that regardless of where you are. No discrimination. The eviction process. Landlord must file a lawsuit in order to evict you. The landlord cannot make you move out by turning off your utilities or changing the locks. They cannot lock you out. They cannot remove your personal property from the rental unit. You cannot self-evict. The eviction process is detailed below. Okay. I don't know how far I'm going to go into this, but if it's okay, so if it's a material term for violating something in the lease, your landlord must give a 10-day notice. And Illinois Forcible Entry and Detainer Act. Boy, they have an act for just about everything. That's okay. Burden of proof is on the landlord. If they're going to sue you, if they're going to sue you for writ of possession, then they have to prove that you've done something wrong. The judge will make the decision, and the judge will typically give a tenant some time to either appeal and or move out. Must appeal within 30 days of the trial. If you do not move out, the landlord may ask the sheriff's office to physically remove you. And remember, only a sheriff can physically evict you. It is illegal for a landlord to evict you by locking you out. So landlords out there, if you're doing this, please don't. Like, that's just awful. And it actually, the people that would lock their folks out are not listening to this podcast. So there you go. Okay, eviction defenses. You may be able to use, this is tenant centric, as you can see. You may be able to use the following defenses to stop an eviction or set a claim for unpaid rent. During you paid the rent during the 5-day notice period. Your landlord retaliated you against for filing a complaint with a governmental authority, or you withheld a reasonable portion of the rent because your landlord failed to maintain the unit or utilities when it was the landlord's responsibility, or failed to make repairs after given notice that they were needed. And then there's a bunch of places that you can call. These are all tenant centric, but I'm sure if you called them and said, hey, I'm a landlord, I need some help, they could give you some information. Okay, well, that's a good running start for Illinois tenancy law. Here we go. I'm going to the next one, Illinois State Bar Association. So this is the association, I think, of lawyers that has the Guide to Landlord Tenant Law in Illinois. And some of this is already in here. So written agreements, you want to make sure you have a written tenancy. And I love this tip. You should put your agreement in writing to avoid future misunderstandings. Duh, that's good. Oral agreements, you honestly do not want to do that. If a tenancy agreement is not in writing, or the term of the agreement will generally be considered month-to-month periodic. Let's see, termination of the lease or tenancy agreement. If the lease is not for a specific term, it may be terminated by either party with proper notice. And then it defines proper notice. Does talk about farm leases. Farm leases generally run for 1 year. Customarily, they begin and end in March of that year because of the growing season. And notice must be given for a farm lease at least 4 months before the end of the term. Okay. And then in all other lease agreements for a period of less than 1 year, a party must give 30 days written notice. And let's see. So in certain municipalities and counties, landlords are required to give more than the above stated notice period of termination. You should consult with an attorney or your municipality or your county, depending on where your rentals are. And that is straight from these guys. That's good. Okay, so let's see, renewal of the lease or tenancy agreement, rental increases. And this is, we've already covered a little bit of the rental increases. Yeah, so it's talking about notice to renew the lease or notice to terminate the lease. You should consult. Yeah, so raise the rent by any amount by giving the tenant proper notice. We've already talked about this. Eviction, termination of rights to possession. 5-day notice. Here we go. So there's a 5-day notice, a 10-day notice, and a holdover. So in Illinois, a landlord does not have a right to self-help and must file an eviction to remove a tenant or occupant from the premises. So 5-day notice. The most common breach of a lease is for non-payment of rent. If in this case, the landlord must serve a 5-day notice upon delinquent tenant unless the lease requires more than 5-day notice. 5 days after so 5 days for the rent to be late. And then after that, 5 days after the notice is served, the landlord may commence eviction proceedings against the tenant. However, if the tenant pays the full amount of rent demanded in the 5-day notice within the second 5 days, the landlord may not proceed with the eviction. It's basically pay in 5 or get out in 10. The landlord is not required, however, to accept the rent if it's not less than the exact amount due. Yeah. So you don't accept partial payments. There's a lot of things that you can automatically deposit. I do not have any of those turned on because I don't want to accept automatic deposits or automatic anything. I don't do that. Okay, 10-day notice. If a landlord wishes to terminate a lease because of violation of the lease agreement by a tenant or other than non-payment for rent, he or she must serve a 10-day written notice upon the tenant before eviction proceedings can begin, unless the lease requires more than 10 days notice, which I'm not sure why it would. Acceptance of the rent after such notice is a waiver by the landlord of the right to terminate the lease unless the breach complained of is a continuing breach. Okay. Next one is the holdover. If a tenant stays beyond the lease expiration, generally because these leases end abruptly if they're fixed. So if it's 1 year and they're staying a week after that 1 year, they're in a holdover situation. Let's see, it says if the terms of the lease or in certain municipalities or counties, a landlord is required to provide a notice of non-renewal to the tenant, you should consult with an attorney, your municipality or your county. So don't assume that just because it appears that everything that ends abruptly in a fixed lease, you still may have to provide a notice of non-renewal, right? Like you still have to properly tell them that you are not going to renew. They should be asking you anyway, but if they're not, you can't just leave them hanging, okay? Service on demand notice. So these 5, 10, or termination of month-to-month tenancy notices must be served upon the tenant by delivering a written or printed copy to the tenant, leaving the same with the person above the age of 13 years who lives at the property's resident, or sending a copy of the notice to the party by certified or registered mail with return receipt from the addressee. If there's no one in the actual possession of the premises, then posting the notice on the premises is sufficient. Subletting or assigning the lease, breach of landlord tenant remedies. So this is if they fail to maintain the unit into livable conditions. Yeah, this is called, if the landlord just lets it go, it's called a constructive eviction. And that's not ideal, right? You don't want the unit to just start becoming inhabitable. That's not good. Inhabitable. The failure of the landlord to maintain a leased residence in livable condition, implied warrant of habitability. Okay, so however, this is interesting how it says that. It says, however, the breach by a landlord does not automatically entitle a tenant to withhold rent or a reduction in the rental value. The obligation to pay rent continues as long as the tenant remains in the leased premises. And to assert this defense successfully, the tenant will have to show that their damages resulting from the landlord's breach of this implied warranty is equal or exceed the rent claim due. So you still have to do your homework. Like, this is not a free walk here. Please note, certain municipalities or counties provide for certain obligations and requirements the landlord must perform. If a landlord fails to comply, the tenant may have additional remedies for such failure. Again, it keeps saying you must consult an attorney, municipality, or county. Breach by tenant landlord remedies. You can sue for rent due. I mean, this is the same thing. It's discrimination. Don't do that. Security deposits and move-in fee. Now, move-in fee is on my bingo card, so let's do that one. Security deposit, we talked about this already. It is, it does not relieve the tenant of the duty to pay the last month's rent or for damage caused on the premises. And the security deposit must be returned to the tenant upon vacating the premises if no damage has been done beyond normal wear and tear and the rent is fully paid. They always say that, and the rent is fully paid, but you cannot automatically just take the last month rent and use the deposit for that. That's not how it works. If the landlord fails to return the security deposit promptly, the tenant can sue to recover the portion of the security deposit to which the tenant is entitled. In some municipalities or counties and certain circumstances under state law, when a landlord wrongfully withholds a tenant security deposit, may be able to cover additional damages or attorney's fees. You should, again, consult a lawyer. Generally, the landlord who receives a security deposit may not withhold any part of that deposit for compensation of property damage unless he furnishes to the tenant within 30 days the statement of damage allegedly caused and the invoice or receipt for replacing or repairing said items. Okay, this is kind of interesting. If a building contains 25 or more residential units in Illinois, the landlord must also pay interest on the deposit from the date it was paid if held more than 67 months. What an odd number, 67 months. So like over 5.5 years. Interest is calculated at the rate paid by the largest bank in Illinois as determined by the total assets on passbook security account. Okay, that's super technical and weird. Okay. Above statements regarding security deposits are based on state law. However, some municipalities may have imposed additional obligations. For example, Cook County, Evanston County, Chicago, and Oak Park all have additional requirements that the landlord must comply with when taking security deposits and provide steep penalties when the landlord fails to comply. So if you have rentals in those 4 counties, Cook, Evanston, Chicago, or Oak Park, make sure you are looking at the local laws there. Move-in fee. In addition to or as an alternative as a security deposit, a landlord may charge a move-in fee. Generally, there is no specific limitations on the amount of a move-in fee. However, certain municipalities or counties do provide restrictions. Tip, a move-in fee should be non-refundable. Otherwise, it could be deemed to be a security deposit. So it is a fee. Okay, so there is an Illinois Tenants Union. You can look at different ideas for resources. There's actually several resources here. www.tenant.org, which it looks like it's a national one, and then there's an Illinois version and the Illinois Tenants Union. And then there's some other resources here: Illinois Free Legal Answers, Illinois Court Help, Standardized Court Forms. Oh, let's go there. Let's do that one. Open link in a new tab. Let's do that. Illinois Legal Aid Online and Illinois Lawyer Finder. Okay, Illinois coins. Oh, this is good. I'm going to put this in. This is a gooder. I'm putting this into the hyperlinks in the show notes. Okay, approved statewide standardized forms. And so let's see what it goes to. Let's see what it says here. Eviction forms are in here. And mortgage foreclosure. No. Proof of delivery. Looks like eviction. Let's go into eviction here. Information on eviction cases, rental assistance, court-based rental assistance program. And it's got all kinds of information here. Orders in eviction cases, getting started, how to use different types of orders. Oh boy. Eviction complaint documents. You got to do a guided interview. That's okay. Notice of termination for non-payment of rent. Let's open that in a new tab just because I'm curious. Oh, great. That is phenomenal. Okay, notice of termination for non-payment of rent. So if you are a landlord, it's actually ready to go. All you got to do is type it all in and print it out and serve it. It's even got buttons on the bottom here. Fantastic. That's great. Okay, notice of termination for lease violation. I bet this is another one. And it is. Fantastic. I love pre-made forms. Demand for immediate possession. Let's see. This is probably a, hey, get the hell out before you have no right. So this is basically for squatters. Yeah, that's what it is. It's for squatters. That can't be for anybody that you've already had to. So I've added this in the show notes. This is fantastic. And there, it looks like there's some other ones. And then they also have some links for Cook County, residents outside of Cook County, and DuPage. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's great. Okay, then I found this one, City of Chicago Residential Landlord and Tenant Ordinance. I'm not going to go super deep into this, but it's here if you have Chicago-based rentals that you can see. And it's got this cool ribbon on the right-hand side with their phone number. So this is pretty amazing. And then the RLTO, which is the Residential Land and Tenant Ordinance in Chicago. So I guess the RLTO, I'm going to open that up. Did I open it up already? No, I did not. Okay, I'm going to open this one up in the window here. Okay, yes, I did open this one. Okay, so Chicago rents right, good tenants, good landlords, great neighborhoods. And so this is 5 pages. It just goes through this. This is the ordinance itself on how this works, talking about illegal lockouts. Landlords must provide tenant that is not in the eviction process. So this looks like fair notice ordinance. This looks like what you would have to do for squatters, maybe. It's not in the eviction process. Yeah. No, it's not. It's not squatters. Okay. rental units that are not covered by the ordinance, they tell you. Fair notice ordinance, what are landlords required to do? You have to give written notice. Okay, there's a whole bunch of these. And then security deposits and prepaid rent. And this is like on micro print, you guys. So if you haven't seen this, make sure you open this up and zoom right in because this can be a little bit crazy. It also talks about attorney's leases, subleases, major defects, failure to provide essential services. Now, come on. That's sad that they have to put that in. Fire and casualty damage, something happens. And then it's right in here, prohibition of retaliatory conduct by landlord. Tenant has the right to complain or testify in good faith about their tenancy. Basically, it's a whistleblower and the landlord cannot retaliate. The landlord is prohibited from retaliating by terminating or threatening to terminate tenancy, increasing the rent, decreasing services, bringing or threatening to bring an eviction action, or refusing to renew a lease agreement. Oh, this is interesting. Message about porch safety. Oh, this is cool. A porch or deck of this building shall be designed for a live load of up to 100 pounds per square foot and is safe only for intended use. Protect your safety. Do not overload your porch or deck. Ah, that's funny. Porch safety. That's important. Porch safety in Chicago. Okay. Let's go to the next one. We've got Illinois Landlord Tenant Law Handbook. Now, this was in a attorney, like a national attorney reference. And so I've gone in here because I want to make sure we get everything. Kentucky kind of traumatized me. So I'm just getting in here. This talks about, I'm just going to kind of scroll through as we go through this. Lease agreements, required lease components, rent increases, notice periods, property maintenance, paying rent on time. Looks like you can have a late fee. We knew that. Leases. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open this up because this is kind of weird that it's paginating like that. Habitability, eviction, constructive eviction. Yeah, required lease components. Rent amounts, landlord's duty to repair, termination clause, sample lease agreement. Okay, so paying rent on time. Respecting other tenants, property maintenance, tenant privacy, huge deal, tenant privacy. Eviction procedures in Illinois. Okay, notice requirement, grounds for eviction. Okay, we've hit some of these already. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now this one is also from a lawyer, which I don't typically do, but they wrote an article, Illinois Landlord Tenant Law Changes in 2025. This is dated January 22nd, 2025. I'm recording this in November of 2025. And I thought this was interesting because they talked about 34 things a landlord can and cannot do as to the changes in Illinois in 2025. So they've made changes to rent payment, landlord-tenant laws to increase flexibility, transparency, and tenant protections. And here are the highlights. So landlords can't require a tenant to pay rent only through electronic means, so tenants have more payment options. That is true. I actually have 3 ways that people can pay rent. One of them is electronic. 2 of them is electronic, but it doesn't matter. There's always an in-person way. Landlords must give written receipts for rent and security deposits so there's more transparency and less disputes. Okay. New rules for security deposits have clearer guidelines for limits and return timelines. And then while Illinois has no statewide rent control, notice is required for rent increases. Landlords must notify tenants of radon hazards, but testing is not required. Now, this is something new, and this is not the only state that is doing this. There's a couple states in New England, I think it's Massachusetts, or maybe it's New Hampshire. It's one of the New England states that is doing this as well. And so this is really interesting. But landlords can be penalized for fraudulent activity under consumer protection laws. Don't be a deadbeat landlord. And landlords must follow safety guidelines to keep units inhabitable. Um, Ban on mandatory electronic funds transfer. Yeah, it's fine. It's an option, but it's not required. And so landlords in Illinois are legally obligated to provide tenants with rent payment receipts for their dwelling unit, and they must include date of payment, amount paid, tenant's name, landlord name, address of the rental property. And landlords must now give a tenant a written receipt of their security deposit within 10 days after receiving this. This requirement is an important one that helps protect both parties, and the receipt must adhere to certain requirements outlined in the deposit laws. Okay, so adjustments to the maximum security deposit limit. In 2025, Illinois security deposit maximums will increase. The alteration in the law provides a better protection for tenants. And while there's no statewide limit for charging a security deposit in Illinois, the increase in the maximum limit provides landlords with more freedom and choices when determining security deposit amounts. Okay, tenant protections in unjust rent increases. Oh, they've got like a poster here. That's kind of interesting. Okay. Extension agreement on grace period. Here we go. In accordance with Illinois rental law, there is no particular grace period specified for extension agreements. However, the extension agreement grace, okay, so this is at the end of a fixed lease. Got it. Okay. And then it goes on here. Okay. Okay, so there's a little bit, I thought that article was a little bit helpful. So that's why I put that in there. The next thing is Illinois Legal Aid. So this is illinoislegalaid.org. And they've got all kinds of, so I went to house and apartment, and I think that's the link. Yeah, that's the link that is in the show notes. And so when you go down to house and apartment links on here, there is, it says it's 49 resources. I don't know if that's actually true or not. But written eviction notice, get the facts. Let's just look at this. So this looks like frequently asked questions. Written eviction notice, who's covered by landlord tenant laws? Okay, so it does explain that. What are 5-day, 10-day, 30-day notices? Unpaid rent. Okay, okay. Well, that's helpful. That's good. Okay, and then tenant right, rental housing, common eviction defenses, reporting building codes, returning or getting a security deposit. Mortgage foreclosures in here as well. Just remember, a foreclosure is just a change of ownership. So as a tenant, this should be relatively seamless, relatively, management will likely change and who they pay rent to will likely change. But it's just a change in ownership. That does not mean that you get non-renewed just because people are foreclosing. Owning a home, fair housing, housing assistance, public housing assistance, utility assistance, and then there's one on homelessness. Okay, I'm going to keep going. We're hitting a lot of the high points here. Oh, abandonment. I did a search specifically about abandoned items on this. And this is yet another law office, KSN, that did this in May of 2025. So I wanted to have some more resources. Sorry, I've been recording all day, so you can tell. Apologies. Okay, abandonment and rental properties can be deceptively complex, and it could be up to law and local ordinances in places like Chicago and Cook County suburbs, and Collier counties introduce many nuances that landlords must carefully navigate, especially when something is abandoned. So what is abandonment? Abandonment generally occurs when a tenant leaves a rental unit without formal termination of the lease and fails to pay rent, both. But how it's defined and what constitutes abandonment varies depending on your location and specific facts, including whether the tenant gave written notice, whether the keys were returned or left behind, whether rent was paid, whether personal belongings remain in the unit, and how long the tenant has been absent. So this is really interesting. Now they have differences in Cook County, Chicago, Cook County suburbs, Evanston, Oak Park, Mount Prospect. I'm not going to go into these different county ones, but just know that they're there. And and there are other resources in this. And so there's so many offshoots on this because it's like if it's Chicago here, and then if it's Cook, it's here. So I'm not going to go into this. If it was for the whole state, I would, but it's not. Um, and just keep in mind, this is not an endorsement of this law firm. This is just, they had this article that seemed like it helps. And the last one I have is about the Illinois State Bar Association. In fact, I think we had this one already, except this was the can't afford a lawyer. So I put the second one in because I wanted to make sure you had all of the resources directly in the show notes. So you've got it in there, and there's a bunch for statewide, Chicago, Central, Southern Illinois, other places, plus law school clinics. That is very likely where you could find somebody potentially pro bono or very cheap if you're trying to get some help. But, you know, a lot of these other locations will give you a consult for not much money. So usually, you know, come on, tenancy issues are there's usually about 20 things, maybe 10 that happen. So especially someone who deals in landlord law, they are very likely going to be able to help you relatively quickly. So you know, may not need a long consult, just saying. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go through my bingo list because I think we got most of it already, which is cool. Tenant application fee. We did talk about this. It is permitted. There is no actual fee, but you do have to say that it is non-refundable. Otherwise, it can be construed as a deposit. Grace period for late rent without penalty. It looked like there was a grace period of 5 days, but you have to be careful because it's the 5 days you're waiting for people to pay rent. And is that late fee due or not? It did not say exactly what the late fee amount is, whether it is a percentage of the rent or a flat fee or a maximum amount. It did say that you are allowed to charge a reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable late fee. Security deposit method via payment. And there's no special anything on that. But I will tell you that if you meet certain criteria of certain units and different things, that you do have to put the security deposit into an interest-bearing account, and it's incredibly technical. So if you are to this point, hopefully you've got a property manager who can help do this for you. If you are a property manager, make sure you do your homework, and especially if you legal counsel, make sure you understand this calculation. There is lots of references about lease wording and details of what needs to be in it. Nowhere did I see any requirement for an emergency contact required in the event of tenant abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment. This is a good best practice, though. Make sure you have this. I also didn't see anything regarding pets or animals or pet deposit or pet rent. I didn't see anything regarding pets at all. Is delivery of a signed lease required? It did not appear to be. That doesn't mean it's not there. Condition inspection at move-in. It did mention that you do want to have a move-in together, and especially if you are doing a security deposit, you want to make sure that you're doing a move-in and move-out, and please make sure that you've got an inventory on paper, pictures or backup. Don't just rely on your pictures. They are helpful, but there might be a legal case there if you only have pictures, okay? So make sure you have the condition inspection, both move in and move out. Standard warning letters or wording. Yes, that was excellent. There are some different ones that are already pre-approved, and I added them in the show notes, which is great. Are there any required maintenance inspections in the state of Illinois? Not that I could see. How often can the rent be increased? Not sure. However, it looks like a proper notice on a rent increase. If you're week to week, it's 7 days. If you're month to month, it's 30. And you cannot raise during a fixed lease. So if you're in a year lease, you have to wait for that lease to be done, and then you can increase the rent. How much can you increase the rent? No idea. You just have to give proper notice. Renter's insurance was not mentioned anywhere in any of these sites. Abuse of access was defined, and so was landlord retaliation. That was defined. In fact, it has its own act. Okay, give me a sec here. Okay. Also, condition inspection and move out, we talked about that. Lease, end of fixed lease is abrupt. Yes, it does not automatically convert, but if you're going to if you're going to non-renew the lease, you must give them proper notice, and you do not have to give them an answer, a reason on why you're non-renewing. That's really interesting. Okay, return of deposit is in 30 days or 45. It looks like there's a little bit to it. In fact, now I'm questioning what it is. Let me see. Return of deposit. That's the limit. Just going back in here real quick. And I'm not seeing it, but it's either 30 or 45. This is that. Come on. Tenant privacy. Nope. Not seeing any of it. Respecting other tenants, paying rent of time, property maintenance, notice periods. Rent increases. Okay, I'll keep going. Can you use the deposit as last month's rent? Yes or no? It does not appear to be. We did see some wording that said no, that you're not allowed to. That's not what it's supposed to do. How long can you give to a notice of eviction due to non-payment of rent? That was 5 days. Notice of eviction for mischief is 10 days. How long until you can get possession of a unit? I think it was 30 days, not sure. And then abandoned items. There's nothing really specific about abandoned items. So if you are in that situation, I did get that article, but it wasn't really helpful because typically when we're talking about abandoned items, it's uh, the value of the items. There's usually a dollar amount, like a threshold amount, like below this amount and above this amount. Sometimes you have to inventory, sometimes you have to store, and then you have to have some kind of disposition instructions. And I didn't see any of that. And along the way, you're trying to get a hold of the tenant the whole time. You're in good faith trying to get a hold of the tenant. I didn't see any of that. So I'm not really sure what's going on with the abandoned items. In fact, I'm going to go back to that KSN about this legal resource. I think it changes in the different. Yeah, see, each one is different. So it says in these suburbs, specific notice requirements for unpaid rent, unexplained absence, written notice, written intent to vacate, uniquely address how a landlord may dispose of personal property and retrieval notices. So this one, abandoned property, that is all location specific. You've got to do your own homework because I'm not going to just start doing every little nook and cranny of the state of Illinois. So make sure you're looking at that. So, okay, we're going to wrap it up here. Each of my location specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of that location? What are the nuances of that location? Guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant, at least a running start. And then 4, where do you get your where can you get some help if you need help as a landlord in your state of Illinois? And then I reviewed my bingo card with standard items that I see most often in tenancy laws in these different locations. This is the same format for every single location specific episode. So if you're interested in another geographic area, you just need to look for it in the library and you already know the format. You know exactly, every single one is the exact same format. And again, this episode is not all inclusive, especially in Illinois. You must do your own homework because it looks like every county and every municipality has its own ordinances, it has its own acts, it has its own ways to do this. So make sure not where you are located, where your rental is located, make sure you're doing your own homework and keep up with it because this stuff does change. Even if you check today, in a year from now, it may be different. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're either new to real estate or you're new to real estate in Illinois, or maybe you're a nugget landlord listening and just trying to learn some more. That's okay too. Things you can do to help yourself are make sure you are very well versed in all of the resources that you can find. And if they're offering things like webinars or conferences or any kind of updating things, whether it's municipalities or state or federal, like fair housing, they have fair housing workshops here. Go to those. You will be surprised at who is there. So make sure you're actually getting up on all the resources. The second thing you can do is actually get in the conversation with other Illinois-based landlords or wherever you are. If you're in Chicago or if you're in Oak Park, wherever you are, make sure you're having conversations with these landlords, either in-person meetups or on social media. There are tons of landlord locations on Facebook especially, and I'm in a lot of these forums as well. Get in there and say, hey, I am a landlord from Illinois and I'm having this problem. What do you think? All the Illinois landlords will jump out and they will help you. So sometimes they might help you too much, but that's okay. So make sure you are checking out where your local meetups are and jump on social media, ask where your meetups are. Lots of local folks that are asking questions just like you, get in the conversation. I sure hope you enjoyed today's show all about Illinois. Don't forget to subscribe to My Life as a Landlord for more expert advice and real stories from across the rental property world. I'm recording today from Maui, Hawaii. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 197, all about Colorado. I'll see you there.